Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're going to give you just a moment to start joining us. We're very excited to see you all and have you with us. I'm Julie Moose. I'm the Executive Director of the National Press Club Journalism Institute. And I'm really happy to be welcoming you on behalf of the Institute team and on behalf of our partners and colleagues in this program and friends at the Markkula Center for Applied Ethics. So thank you for being here, Markkula friends and supporters as well. In just a moment, I'm going to turn the program over to our moderator, Subbu Vincent, who is the director of the Journalism and Media Ethics program at the Markkula Center. He will be introducing our distinguished panelists and beginning what will be a very interesting, instructive conversation. And we're counting on you all to join in. So please do start thinking about your questions. They will be a very important part of what we all learn. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Subbu, and thank you.
Right, thanks, Julie. Thank you very much. I appreciate this event, and I want to thank our speakers for actually joining us today. It's mid-morning on the West Coast, 1 p.m. on the East Coast. We're going to talk about what's next for White House press coverage for the incoming Biden team. And I just want to give you an introduction to how we're going to do this. We'll have two tracks on this exchange of views between us. One is a tips and ideas and lessons track where all three panelists will offer their views to new political reporters, people who might have just taken on the beat, who might just be covering the White House, and also those who are looking to what's going to happen. And at the same time on that track, we'll also have an issues track. Because of where America is today, there's actual turmoil. I mean, I'm running short of backdrops to add to this turmoil. The most recent one is the cyber intelligence hack, and that's just this week. It's the widest and deepest and largest one in history. There's the partisan divide. There's the election, unrest. There's the pandemic and the vaccination supply chain that we have to actually build out. And there's jobs, and hunger. So there's just actually a lot going on. And in the backdrop of that, we're going to be asking about, press coverage. And to speak to us on those two tracks, I'm thrilled to have these three speakers. First is actually, Anita Kumar, White House political correspondent. And she has been covering the White House for 7 years now. And even before that, she was covering political, campaigns. So, and as a Politico correspondent, she's already covering the existing administration, and she's looking forward to reporting on the incoming group. And I'm looking to her to actually represent the voices of people in the reporting team now, so they're in the trenches as you speak, and that would be really good to hear. Thank you, Anita, for being on this discussion with us. Bill Plante, it really needs no introduction. Veteran CBS journalist. I will not do justice to you, Bill, in this introduction. 52 years, retired 2016, covered 4 White House administrations or more, I think, between Reagan, Bush, Clinton, all the way to 2016. And also Bill Plante actually started in 65 at the civil rights movement. So you've covered America during a time when people said America was going to fall apart in the 60s, and you've come all the way to now. So we're looking for your both historical lens as well as how you look forward to coverage on the new, the new team that will run the country. And then I'm really happy to introduce Dee Dee Myers. Dee Dee Myers was White House press secretary with the Clinton administration, the first woman press secretary. She also wrote Why Women Should Rule the World. I love that title. And most recently, she has taken on a top role with Governor Gavin Newsom in California as economic. I think this is a businesses facing role. So I'm really excited to actually, have you here, Dee Dee, and it would be good if you play the press secretary vantage point where you represent, where you see how, the White House as an institution faces off with the press. So that's why I actually like this group. Just very quickly, You can start. I want to thank all people in the audience for actually registering and coming on to take part in this event. Please ask your questions anytime in about 10 minutes or so. I will see the questions. Anita Verma, my colleague at the Markkula Center, is actually seeing your questions, and she will actually route them to me. Just give it about 10 minutes for these folks to respond to my opening foray, and then we can go from there. So to all three of you, and I want to start with Didi here, and I'll ask Anita and Bill to respond to Didi and parse her and pick her apart a little bit. Didi, help us understand the White House press relationship. I'm putting the word relationship in quotes because the press is watchdogging the administration. The press also scrutinizes. There's also power monitoring that happens. So it's not really a relationship, but it's still a relationship. What do you think is built into it? And you used the word built-in tension in the past in one call with us. Could you outline, if you were characterizing this dynamic to a new reporter, somebody who's getting into political reporting, or even to journalism schools, what would you say about it? And when you answer this question, just also tell us how you see the new administration taking a position in this kind of relationship.
Yeah, thanks, Subbu. First of all, I think just to sort of establish the terms, I think the last 4 years under the Trump administration, the relationship has been different, and I'd be very interested in Anita's perspective because she's actually been in the briefing room during both before and during the Trump administration. But historically, the relationship between the press corps and the press writ large and the White House has been sort of an ebb and flow. It's complicated. It's changed as technology has changed the platforms and the speed with which information moves. But there is a built-in tension. I think that generally press secretaries have served a couple of roles. They have served the role of obviously sharing information with the public through the press, and they've also helped the press manage its needs. And then I think a big part of the job is reporting back what the press does need, what people are hearing, where the tension points are, where the problems are, where the problems are going to come back to colleagues and the president inside the White House. And so press secretaries have historically been a bit caught in the middle, serving two masters. That can be kind of challenging on, well, it's pretty challenging on most days. Presidents don't want to hear it. There's not a president that's ever served that doesn't hate the press. I think that they've been treated more unfairly than any president in the history of presidents. And that's a story that, Bill and Anita have lived through from their perspective. But I mean, I think so. The mission of the press secretary's role is to provide information, truthful information, but to control that information in a way that shines the best possible light upon the president and his objectives, his priorities, his agenda. And the press's mission is something else. It's to find out every single thing that's going on every single minute. If they could be in the president's bedroom when he wakes up, they would. Well, you all think you should, I know. And never have a minute that didn't provide full access and transparency into what's happening. So, and the public's interest lies somewhere in between. Full access would preclude honest dialogue and debate about complex topics. The limited access that we always try to manage, leaves some interesting details and useful details off the table. So again, that's where those two sources of tension are: how much information and what information, and then for the press secretary personally, how do you serve the press's needs and the administration, and particularly the president's needs, and sometimes those things conflict as well. So. It's a challenging job on good days. And then the Trump administration is a whole other beast. And I do not think that model will be repeated. I think we know Jen Psaki is the new press secretary is going to be much more in the mold of a Jay Carney or the Obama press secretaries than of anyone we've seen in the last 4 years. So I think you'll see a much more traditional model, a much more traditional rhythm in the briefing room, much more regular briefings. And I think you'll have much more credible information coming from the podium, as we always call it.
Oh, actually, yeah, let's go to, Anita first. Could you parse that, Anita? What is your vantage point on how you look forward to this kind of relationship?
Yeah, I think Didi did a great job of talking about how there's two different roles. I mean, we have to work together every day. We're there together every day, but those are two different roles. And, you know, I would say that the media is there to ask questions for the public. So we do want all the access we can possibly have. It's true. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. We are trying to inform the public. So we want that information. We want to hold the president and public officials accountable. And we want to explain what's going on. Sometimes it's, you know, to explain these complex things that are happening and how they work. So I think it's all of those things. I think that we are looking, you know, just looking ahead now to the next administration. I think it's going to be very, very different. They have signaled that they want to go back to what I would say is pretty much how Barack Obama's White House handled things. But they really want to get away from President Trump's rhetoric, that relationship that he had with the media. So I think that means a couple things. I don't think we're going to hear the next president talking about the media in a disparaging way. I think that's going to go away. But they are going to have more regular briefings and things like that. But I do think that they're going to have Joe Biden be, we're not going to see him probably as much. We're already seeing what they're doing and how they're, you know, this is a signal to us really what they're doing with the transition, which is, you know, everything's very controlled and scripted. They decide who's asking questions. There's only a certain number of questions. He doesn't answer those questions every day. So we are seeing how disciplined his office, his aides are being, and that gives us a sign of what's to come. I do know that they're going to try to have daily briefings. They've mentioned that, but that doesn't mean we're going to see the president every day. And that's a very different thing than the Trump administration. You can take President Trump's rhetoric aside for a minute. He loved having the cameras there. He loved the media being in the Oval Office. And until recently, until this transition after the election, I would say, you know, most days than not, we would get a chance to question him and see him. And so I think that's going to be very, very different. And for those that haven't covered a previous president and they've only covered the Trump White House, I think that's going to be very jarring for them.
So, Bill, can you respond to that also in a historical sense? You've covered many administrations. What do you look forward to with this administration that may be the same as the earlier ones that already Anita has said it might go back to how the Obama administration was? But also historically, what will you say to new reporters and others who are just setting expectations for coverage?
Well, first of all, I think, as Didi and Anita both pointed out, reporters and administration officials live in a mutually dependent relationship. When we validate them, when we put their material in print or on social media or on the air, or we open them to criticism, but they use us to advance themselves, their ideas, to blind test their ideas usually, and to advance their agendas. So in this mutual relationship, one must be very careful not to be too used, as it were. And I can't begin this without going back to one of my all-time favorite professors, Richard Neustadt, the great man who wrote Presidential Power, who said, all new White House administrations display, in his words, arrogance, ignorance, and adrenaline. Now that may be a little less true this time because there are so many veterans of the previous administration coming back, people who know how things were done here. That's both good and bad. We have to move forward in a different time. I mean, this is not the Obama years anymore. Social media is even more pervasive. We have to know.
Actually,
go ahead.
Bill, go ahead. Finish what you're saying.
Go ahead. I think that's where we have to head.
So let's just talk about social media since you actually brought it up. Yeah, you have a history of reporting, Bill, pre-social media, pre-internet. Let's start with pre-internet, Web 1.0, Web 2.0, and social media. Anita has been reporting as well. But given that, and this is also to you, Didi, given that White House officials can go to social on their own anyway all the time, and they do this all the time, and there's an agenda that can play itself out in terms of narratives, in terms of what's the messaging, in terms of getting ahead of the message, and all these things. How do you think that changes the nature of the actual relationship itself? Because you said the press is to explain. So is there an explanatory role that actually helps, or is it all like everybody for themselves? We all go to social media, so we don't need, I mean, where does this actually factor itself in, social media? Can we go to Anita first, and then we'll go back to Bill and Didi?
I'm just remembering during the Obama administration when the White House started to get their message out, not every day, but sometimes through social media. And it was such a new thing then, you know, we just couldn't believe that they would basically bypass the White House press corps and go to social media. That sounds funny to say that now after the last 4 years and how President Trump, you know, tweets all the time and announces firings and hirings and everything else by Twitter. But I remember thinking that, and that was a really big deal. It was a big step at that time. So, I mean, social media has completely changed how we work. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I do think that the next president and the president after that is probably not going to be doing things the way President Trump does, which is announcing policy changes on Twitter that his staff doesn't even know about and firing people on Twitter. I just don't think that's more of a President Trump personality thing than anything else. So I don't think that's going to happen. But sure, I do think it plays a huge role, both for how the White House gets the message out. They may choose to do something by social media and not through a normal, what I would say, a traditional announcement, and however that is in a press release or at the in the briefing room or whatever. So that could be something that we have to deal with. But it also changes how reporters cover things, right? I mean, it's so incredibly competitive, always has been. But now you're basically competing against people's tweets. I mean, who can tweet out the news faster about something, which is something just we couldn't have anticipated before. So it's changed how we do business. I remember thinking and hearing from different places that I work that you weren't supposed to tweet news first. It was always supposed to be in your stories first. You should, don't put anything new out there because we wanted to save it all for our stories. It's just not the case anymore. So it has changed how we approach things, and I think it has changed also how the White House approaches things.
But the more explosive your content is on social media, the more it's going to be shared and bounce back and bounce back. So it seems to me that it's incumbent on us to very calmly try to deconstruct it and present the facts. But that's, of course, not very easy to do when you're working against something that is so sensational, it's viral.
And I would add a couple of things from the perspective of the White House, right? And back, Bill, in my day, we used to try to go around the White House press corps by talking directly to local media. So rather than talking to, Bill at CBS, we would do 10 interviews with the CBS local affiliates in Nashville and, Las Vegas or wherever made the most sense for us, depending on what the message was. And the reason was that those local reporters would ask softball questions more often, or they would stay on topic. So if you were announcing, a new jobs program, they would happily talk about the jobs program, whereas the White House press corps, jobs program, whatever, they want to talk about the latest bit of scandal. We know that there's a lot of scandal coverage because it's what drives the news in Washington in ways that it does in the rest of the country. So, it's the White House is that's just a way of saying the White House is always looking for ways to tell its story unvarnished and without the filter of questions or without the redirect of questions to other topics that become more newsworthy. And that, you could argue this, but that the White House thinks is more germane to the lives of actual people. I mean, they can't care less about the scandal than how are they going to put food on their table and how, how are they going to pay for their kids' college. So, so that's a built-in tension too. And, obviously the medium has moved from local news to social media. And President Obama was the first president who really understood how to take advantage of social media and to use it effectively. But Obama was kind of an interesting case because even though he's older in terms of being a digital native, he tracks like a digital native, right? He sort of thinks like a digital native. He's very socially, he's very modern in his kind of tastes and his use of social media. So he had an enormous social media following. It'll be interesting to see if Biden's able to replicate that. But then he could just put out, and they understood pretty well what people like, right? Small bites, video, things that were interesting and quirky, and they were able to drive a lot of news directly to their millions of followers, and again, circumvent the filter of the White House press corps. So
I'm going to quickly jump in there, Didi. We've got two interesting questions from people on this event audience, and one is, does the vice president have her own press team? So we have a historic vice president, first woman, Kamala Harris, happens to share half an ethnicity with me, especially proud, just being straight here. So Anita, does the vice president have her own press team in a way that impacts the relationship with the press? Does he just, can you just speak a little bit about that, and Bill, you as well?
Yeah, sure. The vice president does have their own press team. The vice president-elect Harris has already announced some of those people are going to be heading up the team, and they'll fill it out with some lower level staffers. So, if you want to know something specific about the vice president, you are going to their office instead of probably the White House. Depends on what it is. Obviously, the vice president's supposed to be a team player and talking about the issues that the president's talking about. So some of those things aren't different. But for example, Vice President Pence today got one of those first vaccine shots. If you wanted to know about those circumstances and what happened and what he's doing, you're going to go to his team instead of someone else. So, there are reporters that specifically cover the vice president, but I will say during the last 4 years, it's been really hard it's been hard for reporters to cover everything that's going on with President Trump because there's so much news. Also cover the first lady, also cover the vice president and other people. So, the focus is really always on the president, but I think this incoming vice president is going to get a ton of attention because of her. She's the first woman, because of her background, and just because she's new. We're at the beginning of an administration, everybody is getting a lot of attention because they're new, and we don't know what that's going to be like.
Thank you. We'll just move to a slightly different track here, and that will also help us get into one more question that's actually come in. We talk about the White House coverage in general so far. There's also different doors at different times that people use. You've got the daily press briefings, you've got presidential press conferences, you've got one-on-ones that you folks have with particular people that you've fixed, and then you've also got leaks and unnamed sources. And I want to start with leaks and unnamed sources first, and then we go to the actual daily briefings itself. In this presidency, the one that's outgoing, I felt that the term anonymous source itself got elevated in American discourse substantially. People know anonymous sources are used, but there is research that says that the American public thinks anonymity is anonymity to everybody, but it's not really anonymous to the reporter. Editors and reporters actually know who these people are. It's just that they are screened out from the story on particular conditions. Can you talk a little bit about how you look at leaks and for the incoming group? You've already said, Anita, that this is going to be really tight. You're already seeing signs. What is your expectation on stories that are going to rely heavily on leaks, heavily on unnamed sources? Can you talk about that? And then I'll go back to Bill, and we'll come back to Didi on that and keep going.
I think there's really two things there. Sometimes, and maybe Didi could speak more to this, but sometimes the White House, or as right now with the transition, with the Biden transition, there are leaks, but there are planned leaks, right? It's the White House wants to give something to a particular reporter or a particular outlet, and that happens. I've noticed that the Biden team appears to be giving certain announcements to certain outlets. So I think that's one thing that everybody does, that all White Houses do, or at least that the ones that I've known about. So there's that. You're talking about more of these anonymous sources. Many people don't want to come forward and say things because they are afraid of the repercussions, either because they work for the administration or, particularly in the last 4 years, they would be afraid that President Trump would single them out. They didn't want to come forward sometimes because they were afraid he would tweet something or that he would criticize or in some way make them public. So, I think each news outlet has probably their own guidance and guidelines on how to decide whether something is anonymous or not. I've worked at different places, and some have been more accepting of anonymous sources and some haven't been. So, you know, it's a rarity, I would say, that we could just, you know, take one thing from one person. It usually has to be confirmed by multiple people. The outlet sort of decides what that is, or the editor decides what that is. But yeah, it's not anonymous, obviously, to us generally. We know who we're talking to. We should know who we're talking to. Our editors should know who we're talking to. And I think that's a problem if it's not getting shared and there's not a conversation about why are we allowing this to be anonymous? Because sometimes people want to take pot shots, quite frankly, and it's really not for that. I mean, the way I look at it is to provide information. It's really not to hide behind an anonymous source to criticize. It's to get information out there that we wouldn't otherwise have. So, you know, it's subjective, but it's by outlet sort of makes those determinations and should have some guidance about that.
And one of the first questions that we need to ask is, what is the agenda of the leaker? I mean, that's very important. And it's also very important for reporters who have good sources not to just become flacks for the sources, because you get to depend on somebody who is usually very helpful and may lose your judgment there.
Didi, can you weigh in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's from the White House perspective, there's you know, two kinds of anonymous sources, the good kind and the bad kind, right? I mean, the good kind are the ones that you control. And, you know, we all engage in this, Anita and Bill and all of our colleagues on both sides. You know, on what context am I talking to Anita today? Is it on the record where she can quote anything that I say? Is it on background where she can quote me and maybe we'll negotiate how I'm identified? You know, a White House staffer or someone close to the president, or, you know, a Democratic operative, you know, if you want to, how far you want to distance yourself from the information. And so sometimes the reason is you just want to have a conversation, right? You want to be able to talk freely. So you say, let's talk off the record for a minute. Let me tell you what's happening. And then maybe I'll talk to you on background or on the record. But I want to explain something to you without worrying that you are going to misunderstand it or quote me out of context. So that's a fair, you know, I think that's in everybody's interest. Let's have an honest conversation. Let me tell you some things that I don't want to see in print, but they'll inform your reporting and make you better. Or protect me, depending on the circumstances. So I think that happens all the time. Then there are times where you're trying to, maybe you're getting ready to announce a piece of information and you want a friendly or at least an informed reporter to frame it, because the first story out will often shape the perception in a very fast and lasting way. So you're announcing a new cabinet secretary. So maybe you leak that to somebody, you know, it's your EPA pick, somebody who really understands environmental policy, writes the first story, and everybody else chases that story with facts in context, right? That you know, there's a price to pay for that, right? Because you might make other reporters mad, and then they'll take it out on you in other ways. But and then there's just people who know stuff, and they may be just trying to show they know stuff. Oh, I was in the room with, and blah blah blah, I heard, and those are really annoying. And then there's the damaging ones where, you know, people are trying to settle a score or move their own agenda at the expense of the president's agenda. You know, there's all kinds of reasons people share information, and there's all kinds of, as Bill and Anita know better than anyone, there's all kinds of levels of reliability of information. And so parsing through that complex mix of motives, you know, the validity, the trustworthiness of the information is complicated, but that off the record information or background information or leaked information does serve sometimes a valuable purpose and sometimes a nefarious purpose. Or sometimes
right. Sorry, Didi, to interrupt you. I wanted to quickly on that, I wanted to tee off to Bill. Bill, can you take this to daily press briefings? Now that we've had a sense of what you, Didi, and Anita had to say about leaks and named sources, what's the role of the daily press briefing really? There's been a lot of theater. There's been also presidential press conferences, also theater. You've covered so many different, White Houses. What does the daily press briefing actually serve that one-on-ones will not? Can you throw some light on that, and then we'll go back to actually Anita on it since she's in the trenches.
Well, first of all, let us stipulate that it is indeed theater. No question about that. But it serves a useful purpose, in my view. It puts issues out there for the public to see and for the White House to respond to. Now, granted, the responses may be somewhat superficial, somewhat canned. You never get very deep into anything. And you do have people elbowing each other to get on camera and ask questions. But it's still very important, I think, that there be this more or less free flow of information in public, seen by everybody.
Got it. So, yeah, Anita, do you want to just comment quickly on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, during the Trump administration, these last 4 years, we would get a lot of questions about what is the point of the briefing? Why should there be a briefing? Because there were so many people upset with how the briefings went, quite frankly, or what was said. And, you know, I'm always going to advocate, no matter what, that I think they should be there. Now, no journalist is going to make that their sole reporting at all. The best reporting, of course, is going to be one-on-one, and it's going to be with White House officials if you can get them. It's going to be with other people outside the building that might know what's going on, whether that's a staffer on Capitol Hill or a lobbyist, an activist. I think all of those play different roles, but I think it's important, as Bill said, that we are able to ask the questions, even if they're not answered. It's important that those questions are out there for the public to hear. So I totally agree with that.
One question that's come, go ahead, Bill.
Follow up very quickly on Anita. Some of the best sources for any White House are elsewhere. They're on Capitol Hill. They're in the agencies. They're in the lobbying community. The people who know what's going on behind the scenes. If the White House won't tell you, somebody else probably will.
I see Dee Dee smiling.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting. I think the balance between who's best served by the briefing kind of ebbs and flows over time. For the White House, obviously, as the press secretary, you can come out, you can make, it's always a good idea to open a briefing with a little bit of news to try to, drive the questions for at least the first 2 minutes. And then it becomes the press's agenda, right? It's whatever they want to ask. You're on the spot to answer the questions. Now, of course, you can say or not say whatever you want to say, but if there's a lot of energy around a particular topic and not as many answers, right, that's an uncomfortable place for the press secretary and the White House to be. And so on any given day or in any given period, I think, again, the balance of interest between the White House and the press corps shifts. The biggest downside to, and I wrestle with the question of should there be a daily briefing, and I generally come out where Bill and Anita are, that there's probably more to be gained by doing it than not. But it's not a slam dunk, because so many days, you guys live this every day. The questions are superficial, they're scandal oriented, they're not meaningful news, they're not about the things that the White House is really spending most of its time on, what the president's agenda is. It's a lot of a lot of scandal of the day, headline of the day, that's forgotten 2 days later. And it makes the public, I think, a little bit cynical about, what's happening. It drowns out meaningful work and meaningful conversations that are complicated and less interesting and less easy to explain, right? And so anyway, I think it's in the Biden administration's interest to continue it, and I think they will. And I think Jen Psaki's a pro, and she's done this at the State Department and in the White House in previous roles, so she'll be good at it. And I think the press will be glad to have somebody back who's going to stand up there every day and tell them the truth.
So thank you, Dee Dee. Let me get to a question that's already come in from one of the people in the audience. It actually applies to press briefings as we are speaking about it now. There's this question of amplifying disinformation that's front and center for the last 4 years. And press briefings, press conferences have been used to literally take non-facts, non-realities, and pelt them out into the air on social media as well, and simultaneously here. What do you think the new White House team, administration, cabinet officials, secretaries, Anita and Bill, do you see them, what's your outlook to that? What's your outlook to anticipating disinformation as a narrative development agenda on press conferences itself? Can you just speak to that, both of you? You go first, Anita, and then I'll go to Bill.
Well, I mean, the Biden team has criticized the Trump team for putting false information out there. So we can hope that they feel differently about this and that they will be putting out factual information. I think, no White House wants to put out information that they don't want out there. It's not a question of, hopefully it's not a question of whether they lie or not, but, there are a lot of press secretaries and White House officials that are quite good at just not answering the question or, putting a good spin on it, on something they don't want to answer. That's not disinformation. That's just doing their job, which is to protect the president. And so we have to be careful that we know that's coming. I do think that has really been difficult for us the last 4 years. We have gotten a lot of criticism, the media has, that we are not fact checking in real time, which is a very, very tough thing to do on social media or on live television, or, just to have the room in a story that you're writing. So I think that the media has gotten much better over these last 4 years on how to do that, but there is still work to be done on that. And it's tough because we don't have the ability to know the answer. Sometimes when you hear something, you have to go fact check it and figure it out for yourself, whether it's true or not, or what the circumstances are. So it's tough. And I don't know that there's one answer to that, but we have to get better at that. And I think that people are skeptical. There are people skeptical. There are people on the other side that will be skeptical of what they hear from the Biden folks. And it's important that we fact check them as well.
There will always be times, I think, for any administration when they want to be economical with the truth. In other words, to tell it, but just enough of it, or in such a way that it doesn't reflect as badly as it otherwise might. You have to expect that. And it's up to us to pay attention and do what we can to get the whole truth.
And I'll just make one quick comment, which is, and you, Anita and Bill can't say this, I can, and I am a partisan, but I don't think this is a partisan comment. The level of misinformation coming out of official channels in this White House is unprecedented. It is not like everybody does it, and it's a little spin here and a little spin there. Yeah, White Houses do that. I did that. This administration has taken the willingness to misinform and in fact just share outright provably false information. We haven't seen that. I don't know, certainly not in my lifetime. And I think we'll see a different, relationship with the truth in the next administration. Again, that was my partisan hat, but I think it exceeds beyond pure partisanship.
So one question that's coming in now, since we're also speaking, let's take the shoe on the other foot. We're speaking about officials amplifying disinformation intentionally and so on. Let's look at the criticism on the press. There are people who say in this era of sensationalization and immediacy, there's this immediacy partly because of social media. Anita said that you're competing with tweets. In that environment, people feel there is sensationalization by the press too, and the integrity of journalism has been somewhat gutted. We're chasing immediacy to the exclusion of fact checking or slowing the pace down. Bill, do you have some, I know you had to jump off when a call came. Do you have something to say about the criticism of the press in White House coverage about, sensationalizing stories?
Yeah, I'm against it, but it's very hard to avoid the great grabby headline. The fact that seems to jump right out at everybody. And they say, "Oh my God, really?" You kind of live for that, but you have to be really careful. I don't have a lot of advice to give except to use your best judgment.
Anita, how do you walk the line? How do you handle the immediacy factor versus the story that you really, at some time you want to tell? And how do you handle that?
Well, I can say, definitely from every White House, there's a million stories at all the time, right? Particularly these last 4 years where it seems like the news cycle was 5 minutes, right? There's a new story with 5 minutes. you're only one person, I guess I would say. And you can't cover everything, and you need to pick and choose what you think is important, what deserves that extra attention and extra scrutiny and extra reporting to really put something into context. I mean, we can't, no reporter, even no outlet can cover every single thing that's going on in the White House, because that's how many things are going on. So, you know, that's how I personally have looked at it, which is I don't write about every single tweet from Donald Trump. I couldn't possibly do it anyway. But I pick and choose those things that I think are the most important things that are going to be long lasting policies or important things that happen there that people should know about. And I just try to take some time. I don't mean weeks, but, you know, take some time, if it's a day or 2 or 3, to do the reporting, to put that context out there. I mean, I guess, you know, I heard another reporter say once, and this is so true, is particularly during the Trump administration, you have to take a day off. You have to do other things. You have to, you know, do whatever, live your life. It does not matter. In a week, you'll come back, or you'll do something else and you'll come back. There'll still be plenty of news. The news isn't going anywhere. So, you know, it's okay to take the time to report something. There will be plenty of other stories there later, and putting out a good story, something that can really tell someone something they didn't know, is important.
Okay, well, we lost Subbu for a moment, so I'm just gonna step in with the other questions that has come up. There's been a lot around the challenge of trust and mistrust, and the question of how to regain the public's trust, or whether we can regain the public's trust. And so I'm interested in whether you think that genie can be put back in the bottle, or what you see happening next, specifically in terms of White House coverage.
Who's that to?
It's to all 3 of you. Why don't you start?
Yeah, I'll start. It's a great question, and I wish every day I sort of wish I knew the answer to this. You know, I'll just say a couple things about this. One, I think that the credibility issue with the media has been slowly becoming an issue over time. So yes, I mean, definitely President Trump contributed to that with his rhetoric, but I don't think it started 4 years ago. I think if you look at polls that Gallup and others have done, you'll see that it's over time that there's been credibility problems. So I wouldn't just attribute it to President Trump. I think part of what's going on these days is that we have become so partisan, and the way we get our news is not the way it used to be, where you watch the evening news together and you got your newspaper on your doorstep. You are looking at news through the filter of what you want to see. So you might look on Facebook and you're only seeing people that agree with you. So you're only seeing certain news, or Twitter, or wherever else you're looking. And I think that has actually hurt the news media, because you're only seeing what you want to see. And somehow people have started to believe that the other opinion, or the other side, or the other party is lying, or it's not true, or they're just wrong. So
Anita,
I think,
on that note, since you actually got to the exact question, I mean, one of the questions in the audience is this, and we can move to one thing about the next normal, what you folks think is going to be the next normal. But one of the underlying backdrops is dwindling trust in the press. And there's also the ongoing partisan divide. It's a pretty deep divide. Can you talk a little bit, Bill, Anita, and Didi, on what you think of the new normal? What kind of coverage do you think is the new normal? You've sort of spoken about it, but what do you look for in it that may increase trust in the press? There's also the question of amplifying accurate information as opposed to the opposite that we've seen. So when you see what's the role of officials and what's the role of the press to actually increase trust in journalism, is there something that you can actually speak to? We can start with Bill. Bill, give you a sense of the history of the word trust, dwindling trust, and how you see it maybe going up in terms of the new administration. Then we'll go to Didi and Anita.
Well, I mean, when I started covering the White House in 1981, The news at 6:30 Eastern on CBS, NBC, and ABC was what we said it was. And people didn't have much option to find it anywhere else. And now, of course, you can select your own news and you can decide what news is or isn't. So it seems to me that, first of all, we have to double down on accuracy and verification and transparency. That sounds cliched, but I don't know how else to start. You have to allow for the fact that millions of people in this country believe that we are feeding them a false narrative about who won the election. Now, that may seem ridiculous to many, but it is what is out there. So how do we repair that with the truth? By stating it and restating it, and partly by listening and to people when they make these claims and trying to point out where the facts are, but by continuing to restate them. I don't know where else to begin. Sorry about that.
You know, I will just add that to Anita's point earlier, this isn't something that started with Donald Trump. There's been an erosion in trust in the media, but I think it tracks the just growing partisan nature of the country, right? For complex reasons that we could do a whole couple hours on. But there's two things, right? There's kind of the great sorting out where the red states are becoming redder and the blue states are becoming bluer, and people don't talk to anybody that doesn't sort of, have the same views that they do, one. And two, social media, the role of social media is so dramatic, because not only do people choose their source, those sources choose them, right? And social media, if I click on a story about something, about how the election was stolen, they will direct 20 more stories to me that reinforce that perspective. And we all know that humans are conditioned to look for facts that reinforce their worldview, as opposed to starting with the facts and letting those shape their worldviews. As we as humans are susceptible to that. And that's one of the reasons that social media built algorithms the way they did. And I do not know what the answer is. I just think we're in for more of the same, at least in the short term.
I agree. I don't know the answer either. It's the tough one. It's really sort of the biggest issue facing the media right now. And I don't know what the answer is. I can just tell you that personally, I approach it as Bill said. I mean, you just got to put the factual information out there. For me, that's to tell both sides. I know some people don't like when they hear both sides, but I want to share what, let's say it's a partisan issue. I do want to share what Democrats say, and I do want to share what Republicans say. I want to explain, it's more than just sharing what they say, but explain why that is, right? There might be some philosophical reason for that. So I would just say that we just have to put the information out there, be careful and be factual as much as we can. And to get that trust back, I think, every time there's a mistake, I'm talking about a big mistake, obviously we all make small mistakes, it sets us back. So I would just say that we have to double down and be even more careful than we were before.
Can I ask Anita a question though?
Go ahead.
Because I totally respect, right? I think we all grew up in the tradition of, the media's job is to present both sides and let the reader or the viewer decide. But what about when one side says the election is unresolved? It's not clear who won. How do you deal? That's not a totally new reality, but it's a much more widespread reality than it was a few years ago, where you have the leaders of either party. And I'm blaming the Republicans because I've got my partisan hat on again, but we're seeing that in a way, both sides are not equally invested in the facts.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I think if you look around at, what Politico has written, but everybody else as well, I mean, how people are explaining, I shouldn't say everybody, but many outlets are explaining it, which is, that President Trump is saying, and others are saying, the election's not decided, but in fact, it is. And here's why. I think you're seeing stronger language than we have used before on there isn't, for example, President Trump isn't providing the evidence to show what he is saying, that there's, fraud, that we are talking to experts who say there is no fraud, and also, for example, now, even today, he's talking about how it's not over. And when you talk to people that understand the Constitution and understand the electoral process, it's pretty much over, right? The Electoral College voted. So I do think that it's incumbent on us to explain that and put it out there. So I do think both sides are still important, but we need to call people out when they say things that aren't true. And I think that people are trying to do that and have tried to do that with President Trump. Some of that is difficult in real time. When he is saying things, you know, all the time, every minute on Twitter, it's very difficult to fact check that in that moment.
I would just add
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I would just add this. I think it's really important for reporters not to reflect certitudes that are moral or political. It has become fashionable in some circles to believe certain things. For example, in much of the coastal elite, you take it for granted that certain things are absolutely true and therefore having to do usually with race or other sensitive matters. And you are expected to believe that even as you report on it. This is not healthy. You can believe it, of course, but it shouldn't inflect your reporting.
How would you, Bill, on that note, how would you handle, opposing views on, let's just say, equality? Or, you may, as a reporter, believe in racial equality, and you may end up encountering a white supremacist in your interview process, and that person is indirectly or directly saying, we just want a separate nation for ourselves. Then how do you account for those kinds of views in your actual storytelling?
Exactly, because many of the people involved in promoting racial justice are going to expect the reporter to be on their side, as they expect any thinking person would. So no matter his or her beliefs, the reporter can't be a cheerleader, but has to report the facts as they exist.
So it seems like it's easier to talk about this on the facts level. It's the value divide that seems to actually be at the heart of the friction in this country. Having had this chat, let me move to one more question in the audience about newsworthiness. I see this from Anita Verma here. Anita and Bill and Didi, you can weigh in on this on the opposite side from the White House side. But in terms of newsworthiness and selection, Anita, can you tell us how do you decide, how do you advise incoming reporters to actually decide on, there are many stories and you said you're only one person and you have to pick what is important. Is what is important also a newsworthiness calculation for you? And how do you take the call on what's newsworthy at all?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I guess some of that is subjective in that you are trying to determine what is more important. I look at sort of what's long lasting. If it's a big policy change and it's going to impact millions of people, or if it's going to, be a policy issue for a long period of time, you might look at things like that. But it's not always that, because sometimes someone says something and it's an outrageous thing that they've said, and that may not be a long-lasting impact, but it's something that is important to cover. So it's really just the different things that you have to deal with, right? What is important to tell people, what is important for your accountability purposes. But it's not just one person generally making those decisions. In a news organization, many people are making those decisions, and talking about those things sort of every day. How do we determine which are the most important things to cover? And it's tough. I will say, on a personal level, on the White House beat, you can cover every single thing in the world. There, the White House covers everything from foreign policy to anything, lawsuits, different things. The way I have approached it all the years that I've covered is I've taken a couple issues that are going to be the things that I concentrate on. Of course, I cover every single thing, and we all do. But, I have liked, and this is how we do it where I am, is that we kind of split off different issues. So I can sort of drill down on, for example, immigration is one of the things I cover. I know a lot about that topic. I know a lot of people that are well-versed in that and know what's going on at the White House. So I know sort of what's more newsworthy there. I like to have sort of, as I call them, mini beats. So I know can follow that more closely. And, my colleagues might cover, the economy or healthcare. So I do think it's helpful for reporters on the White House beat, which is so vast, to break off a piece of issues, some issues that you can really drill down on.
That's really good advice, because we didn't do it in the years that I was covering. We would scratch the surface, or as one of my producers used to say, get out there and scratch that surface.
Bill, you mentioned in an earlier call with us that journalists, or actually in your interview with CBS on your retirement, you mentioned that journalists really are not doing this for themselves. They're representing the public. And if you ask scholars, they'll say there are many publics. There is no one public. So when you say represent people, that's what reporters are doing. How do you navigate the newsworthiness call? How did you take the call when actually you were covering the White House? Because and if you can answer this also, because we are in the middle of a pandemic that's getting worse, but the good news is we have vaccines, but there's an entire supply chain to be run for 600 million doses to be given to 300 million Americans. So there's all kinds of news that's going to happen there. So how do you navigate newsworthiness for yourself as a journalist, professional, and when you represent people?
You raise a very good point, because we all are the sum of what we grew up with, what our parents made us, what our education made us, what our own beliefs tell us right now. And that's how we decide what is important. And if you're a reporter, you decide what is newsworthy based on what you've learned about the craft over the years and what's expected of you by your colleagues. So you have to be thoughtful going ahead about how you deal with each individual subject. Just showing what's going on is not enough.
So we are 56 minutes into the hour. We've got a couple of minutes to do a wrap before I hand it back to Julie. I want to start in this case with you, Bill, again. I know you just finished this round, and I'll end with Didi. Bill, can you just summarize? You have deep concerns about social media on what's happened, because you've seen the pre-social media era and you've seen the post era, and you are concerned about the actual divide. Can you wrap up on what you're looking forward to for the Biden administration's coverage in the press over the next 4 years in about 30 seconds to a minute, and then we'll go to Didi, and then we'll actually end with Anita.
I'm hoping that the Biden administration, because it is composed
Your audio is muted.
It's composed of people with experience who have done this before, and who I hope will adjust to the new normal of social media. And I think that we can get back to something that resembles the old normal, but that's not good enough. We need to do better. And we need to do better by listening and explaining and being more transparent.
Didi, you go next, and I'll give the last word to Anita.
Yeah, I agree with what Bill just said, and I think that applies to both sides, right? I am hopeful that the Biden administration will restore a higher level of expectations about facts and the kind of information that comes from the White House briefing room and the White House social media accounts and the individuals who work there. It's a high bar, and I think every administration should struggle to reach it. Our boss in public service is the American people, and providing accurate, reliable information and rebuilding trust in government is essential to our functioning as a democracy. We've seen in recent weeks what it looks like when that trust is eroded, and it's really frightening, I think, for all of us to think the institutions held this time, but without ballast of more trust going forward, it's going to be hard. And so I think all of us play a role in that. Those of us who are on the inside working for government and sharing what we do with the public, and for the people who bring that directly to the American people through both the traditional media and social media. So, I remain more of an optimist, but it's a tough road ahead.
Anita, can you wrap in 30 seconds, and I'll do 5 seconds and hand it back to Julie.
Sure.
She wants to stop the clock.
I mean,
Go ahead.
I totally agree with what both of them said, but as a reporter there, I'm going to say I want everything, right? I want the factual, honest information, and I want all the access we can possibly have. I would love, White House officials to be available. I'd love the president to do news conferences, and I'd love a daily briefing every day. So we want a little bit of everything. I think that the White House should want to get their information out and get their side out. And I would hope that is what we have coming for us.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Anita. Thank you, Didi. I'm going to hand it back to Julie.
Thank you. Thank you, Subbu. And thank you to our panel for your realism and your optimism. Thank you all for being with us. The Journalism Institute is here to help. We've waived all registration fees since March in light of the pandemic at a savings of more than $52,000 to participants like you. So we're hoping you'll give our work a thumbs up with the donation and support of learning like this. And we hope you'll complete a survey about your experience so we can design programs that you and other journalists need most. So you'll receive links to do both in an email shortly, along with a link to a recording of this program. So please stay well. Thank you all again very much for being here, and we hope to see you again soon.